Does inner peace come from robes, fighting styles, meditation, or something else? Well, today in our companion series to our annual theme this year, we're going to be doing religions is our theme, whether they're real or fictional religion. We're going to be going through them. In our companion piece, we're going through where real religions show up in our fandoms and just discussing how they're portrayed. And for our first episode, I'm here, Joshua Noel, one of your hosts, and I'm joined by a good work friend of mine. We've worked at two different workplaces together. He is the god of dragons, believe it or not. and he's actually a friend of mine who is practicing Buddhist. And I thought it would be great to kick this series off talking about Buddhism and fandom with someone who's practicing Buddhism. So, Ant, welcome to the show. What's going on, man?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Did I mention his name's Anthony Watts, or did I just say Ant?
Ant's fine. Ant's the dragon,
God
the
of
dragon lord,
Dragons.
whatever.
Yeah.
yeah.
Richard, Victor. He's a man of many names.
Oh man, yeah.
Well, man, you know. Oh man, dude, I've had so much fun working with Anthony over the last few years at Shutterfly, then at Chipotle. He's a great guy, and literally everyone who knows Anthony always talks about how he's so calm and just so nice. And I think a lot of that does come from some of his beliefs we're going to talk about today. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting. We like to start off just mentioning something we're geeking out on right now. I got a bunch of graphic novels for Christmas that I'm into. So I'm like going through Twig from Scotty Young, The Iron Fist by Alyssa Wong, and a bunch of things like that. Yeah, it's been a fun Christmas. Anthony, what have you been geeking out on these days?
Just catching up on some anime that I've been trying to watch. I've just been busy. But mostly like Chainsaw Man and Hunter x Hunter. There's some other animes and Record of Ragnarok, and that actually has some Buddhism in it as well.
Oh, okay. So we'll revisit that one. I have to ask you about that. Also, we're both big One Piece fans. I know that, and it's like you're always catching up on One Piece. No one's caught up. Like that's not a thing.
No.
If they tell you, they're lying to you. They catch up, get behind 100 episodes, and then do it again.
Yep. It's a never-ending show.
Yeah, you call it caught up if you're within 50 episodes. I think that's how it goes. Like I'm caught up. I'm only 40 episodes behind. Oh man. Yeah. All right. So then with that, this companion series is one of our 4 series that's brought to you by our patrons. We typically have this go live to Patreon first, then go up to YouTube. We are doing it a little different this time just because it's not 2024 yet. And I thought it'd be weird to start this 2024 series in 2023. So we're recording it, then we're going to put it out. But I do want to give a special thank you to all of our patrons who make episodes like this happen. So you guys are awesome. Thank you. And if everybody who's listening wants to like and rate and review the show on Podchaser, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, that helps a lot. Or smash that like button and subscribe for Will on YouTube. Will always loves it when people do that. So you got to do it for him. That's really what it's about. You do all things for the Lord, but then some things you do for Will. That's one of those things you do for Will. Again, thank you guys for making this episode happen. Check out the rest of our companion series down below. We'll have a link. It'll have last year's companion series as well as this year's, all there together. Also, as we get our religion series together, we'll have that link down below so you can follow those episodes as they come out on the main feed on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast. I feel like I used a lot of words right then, but now we can get to the episode proper. And we're going to focus on 3 main fandoms where we saw some Buddhism. Then we're also going to get on what Anthony mentioned earlier, as well as I'm going to talk about Life of Pi a little bit, but we're going to come back to that more for some other things. But let's start. For some reason, the first thing I thought of, and I told Anthony, and I was so surprised he knew what I was talking about. I was like, dude, Xiaolin Showdown. And I just did not think anyone would know what I was talking about when I say Xiaolin Showdown. And it turns out I didn't even know. They had like 3 seasons proper, started in 2003. And then like 10 years later, Disney picked it back up with Xiaolin Chronicles. So in 2013, they have a whole nother season that I haven't seen that I started today.
That's news to me.
Yeah, I was so surprised. The other thing I was surprised about, where the other two we're going to talk about. We're talking about Xiaolin Showdown. Then we're going to discuss some the Good Place and how Buddhism is represented there. Then we're going to talk about Avatar: The Last Airbender. Here's the news that surprised me while I was doing some research for this. I thought Xiaolin Showdown was like Fox and then Disney trying to rip off Avatar: The Last Airbender because they're monks who are fire, wind, water, and earth. And I'm like, okay, this is just Avatar: The Last Airbender. This came out first though.
Yep.
Like that blew my
a long time ago.
So this was before Avatar. So Avatar ripped off of them and made it better.
Yeah, they took a different turn on the character style and just how it was drawn out.
Yeah, I also, we'll get to that later, but I feel like they also kind of represent Buddhism a little bit better. Neither of them I don't think either of them are like, hey, these are Buddhists, but they're both portraying Buddhist monks, and I feel like Avatar does it a little better, in my opinion. But we can get that a little bit later.
Yeah.
Xiaolin, what do you remember of Xiaolin Showdown? This it was a cartoon in 2003. What do you remember about it, if anything?
Oh man, that was a long time ago. I think mostly just I forget his name, but the kid right there in the bottom with the yellow head, pretty much.
Yeah, he's like the type A character. He's also the youngest.
Yeah.
For some reason, I can't remember. I can't remember his name either. I was watching the show earlier today. They found another yellow-headed character on the bottom. This is like how Xiaolin Chronicles starts, and his name sounds nothing like this, mind you. He has some long, like complicated name, and the other character that like we were just talking about nicknames him Ping Pong. And I'm like, that's like the most terrible stereotype. Like,
Yeah.
that's awful. But I guess Disney seems to have got away with it. Not enough people noticed to make a big deal out of it.
I mean, they just accept it, man.
Yeah, Disney felt like doing that. Yeah. So what's interesting? So the Shaolin monks is what they're a part of, which is a real thing in our world. There is Shaolin monks. They are nonviolent though, because Buddhists are nonviolent, and I find it fascinating that this whole group is like they're training the perfect martial arts. They're going around collecting different relics, and each relic has different powers. And if two people touch it at the same time, like the good guys and the bad guys, because that's always what happens, then you can claim Xiaolin Showdown, and the whole earth kind of terraforms into an arena, and you fight. And each of you wager your own relic, and whoever wins gets all three relics. Which also made for a great video game. Just gotta say, it was on PS2 and PSP. It was a lot of fun on PSP. Me and my brother played it in the car all the way from Florida to Kentucky.
Yeah, they should remaster it.
God, they should. That was a good game. But yeah. So what's interesting? So the characters we have here, we said we have like fire, wind, earth, and water. They're not all the same. Like they're not all like Asian characters or whatever. Like you have one that's like cowboy hat, really stereotypical Western American.
Yep.
Then you have the yellowhead kids, obviously supposed to be Asian, which make of that what you will. I think the girl is supposed to be Japanese and the guy is supposed to be Hispanic, perhaps.
Yeah,
I couldn't really tell. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So I thought that was interesting that they brought them all together to kind of show like the values and stuff that they're teaching isn't just about ethnicity or where they're at, but it kind of felt a little clunky, a little stereotypy. How'd you feel about it?
I didn't take it as that way, as it being like a stereotypical, just having them like a different. I could see it as being different backgrounds working together.
Yeah, and I think that's what they were going for. So I like I'll show them grace. And I think the characters that are like the most stereotyped, the yellow, that's a little like whatever. But he also has glowing dots on his head, so I just don't think he's supposed to be a normal kid.
No, yeah, he's definitely not.
Yeah. Then the Western character, he was very stereotyped. But I feel like Americans are allowed to make fun of Americans. Like I feel like that's just a thing.
Yeah, that's something we're big on.
Yeah, we can make fun of ourselves all day. But yeah, so we have these characters from different backgrounds coming together with the different elements. This show, then Avatar does it as well. the whole thing is like with the elements, it's like they're trying to get in touch with nature. As far as like when we're talking about how Buddhism is represented, I know the violence thing isn't really part of Buddhism, like as such, but maybe martial arts is. I'm not really sure on that one. And then I think the whole being in touch with nature is. So could you kind of maybe comment on some of that from what you know?
Well, I would say like the way Buddhism is more spirituality. So it's on how you take things of life and how you are going through life. So they do have Shaolin monks that are they do that's a martial art. Shaolin is so there is monks who are Buddhists that um, know martial arts.
Okay. That's actually pretty interesting. How does that fit in? Like other than because I used to do martial arts and part of it I know was kind of like inner peace and kind of like just getting control of your own body, I feel like. But as far as like the self-defense and the fighting, like competitions kind of stuff, it seems weird to pair that with a non-violent religion. Is it just like a coincidence or is that actually grow from some of the beliefs in some way?
Well, being aside apart from a religion that it can be seen as however you want it to be. Some people do see it as a religion, so they are passive with it. They some people don't. They see it as a way of life. They see it as it being more spiritual, and really, it's all up on the person how they want to take it. So some some people are not passive as a Buddhist, and some people are.
Okay, so that's not like a universal thing within Buddhism.
No,
Interesting.
there's different people take Buddhism however they want. There is the teachings, but
Yeah.
some people don't follow all of the teachings. There's steps to get to those, and some people are on a more spiritual path, so they will follow all of those teachings, and some people are not. They're more of on a embodiment of just trying to better themselves.
Yeah. That's something we'll probably touch on more in this episode. And then throughout the year, a lot of your more Eastern religions, some of the big differences that I think I've noticed is it's less here is our one book. We do everything exactly like this. And more, there are a lot of teachings we pull from and we learn from, and we don't have to hold any of them with a tight fist, but rather an open hand kind of deal. And that's where from my understanding, a lot of people in like the Eastern world don't really claim themselves as, oh, I'm a Buddhist or oh, I'm Hindu. They're more like, yeah, I worship this God. I have this practice. They like learn from all of these things together rather than I'm exclusively this.
Right.
Is that, yeah. Okay, cool, cool, cool. So as far as like yourself, I mean, you mentioned like some people see it as a religion, some people more like spiritual. Like, where do you see yourself in this path?
I see it as spiritual. I like to like how you said. I like to take different things from different ways of life that I see that could be beneficial to me and my spiritual growth.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's more fulfilling than being hard on just one certain thing.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I got that. Do you remember Xiaolin Showdown or Chronicles well enough to give it a rating 0 to 10? Because I don't feel like I remember it well enough to rate it. Like I'm like I remember enjoying it. It was funny. It was good. But I don't know if I'm like I feel like if I give it a rating and I rewatch it, I'm either going to be like, ooh, oh no, that was bad, or I'm going to be like, oh man, I didn't rate that anywhere near good. Like like I feel like I don't
Right,
remember it
right.
good enough to do that. But
Same. I don't. It's
okay,
a yeah. My childhood would probably rate it like
yeah,
a good
I
10.
love this. I would never miss the show when I was a kid. I loved this, but I don't remember it as well as an adult. All right. Then let's go to our next one. The Good Place. You said you haven't seen it yet. You saw some of it today, but you haven't really dived in as much.
Yes, yes.
Okay. I'm gonna do as much of a spoiler-free version of some of this as I can.
Okay.
Um, I might do is light spoilers okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
I'm still gonna check it out. What I've watched is I'm interested in it.
Yeah, yeah. So what happens is these characters die at the very beginning. They die and they show up. They're told they're in the good place. And a lot of where they're actually at gets brought up into question throughout the series. Are they really in the good place? I don't know. You got to watch it. You got to find out for yourself. But a lot of the stuff isn't quite right. And some of their identities seems to have been swapped whenever you're in that first season. So like the main character, Eleanor, is like she died at the same time as someone else with the exact same name and birth date, but that person was an amazing person and she's kind of like a selfish, terrible person. And she's there and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, you did all this for these poor people in this country." And she's like, "Yeah, I did. Sure did. That was me." you know. And one of the ones that got mixed up that was really funny. Ah man, I'm trying to remember the character's name. My brain is awful. It turns out he's a Hispanic character from Jacksonville, Florida. But when he showed up in the good place, he shows up in these Buddhist monk robes. And everyone's telling him he's this monk by some other name that took a vow of silence. So here you are being told that you died. You're in the good place because you're this monk. And you're like, well, I'm sure not going to correct anybody. I think so. He's having to pretend like he's this monk that took a vow of silence. But really, he's like kind of a druggie. He's not really the smartest on the block. He's from Jacksonville, Florida, who like party life, all this stuff, and kind of wasted his life a little bit. But it was really interesting to see how, if you don't know what a Buddhist monk is, how you pretend to be a Buddhist monk was kind of interesting. And seeing what everyone else's expectations around him were. And in the good place, everyone had their perfect match. So he was matched with this other girl who was really frustrated that her perfect match wouldn't speak because he took a vow of silence. She's like, I don't want this. Look, I want someone who will talk with me. But yeah. So everything's topsy turvy. The good place might not be perfect, As far as like the premise goes, I'm curious from your perspective, how do you think if somebody just like a random American who's not necessarily practicing Buddhism or anything, if they were to pretend to be a Buddhist monk, how do you think they would act?
I would say like they'd try very hard to be polite.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. I mean,
not
that's
try
probably
to
a
be
good.
rude. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I the silence thing I think is what interests me. I think that's a thing across several different religions though, where like certain monks, even in like Catholicism, take a vow of silence.
Hmm.
Um, the funniest one, of course, for me being in Gallivant, the show Gallivant. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's hilarious.
No,
They
not
have a
really.
group of monks that took a vow of singing, and the chief monk is Al Yankovic. It's so great. It's so dumb, but they can't talk. They can only sing to you.
Hmm.
But yeah, so this was interesting and seeing how hard it was because he was like the most American, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
And just to see
yeah,
how challenging it was for someone like that with that mindset who grew up a certain way to just be silent and to just get along. Like it seems like, well, hey, if my option is the good place or not the good place, I could be silent and get along. And then you're watching it and you're like, just seeing how hard it was for him. I'm like, hmm, maybe some of us as Americans do need to learn how to do some stuff better. Um, what do you think? Is silence, is any of that other stuff like actually part of Buddhism, or is that just more specific to monk life?
Um, I would say a vow of silence is really on a person themselves. Anybody can take a vow of silence, like you said. But for me, I've actually taken a vow of silence. I just not spoke, and my goal was to just listen, just become a better listener. And I think that's a huge part of that. So I think that's what they mainly do is just listen more, and they learn things without speaking because you learn to think first before you do speak. So I think that it's beneficial.
How long did you take a vow of silence?
Uh, the first time, just 2 weeks.
Oh, so you've done it more than once.
It's not easy for a person that sometimes I talk, so I like to talk. but it's good to learn to when to talk and what to say, and when to be a really good listener.
What's the longest you've taken a vow of silence?
2 weeks. That's the
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean that's I could not do that. And not just because I run a podcast.
see.
A
It
vow of
would be
silence for a
very
podcast
hard.
would be awful. This is your show, guys.
Yep.
Oh man, yeah. Um okay, interesting. Yeah. So learning to listen is something I think and that's something that's not just like a Buddhist principle. I feel like that's like in general, people just should learn to listen better. Like I feel like that's probably a good thing. And learning to just get along,
Hmm.
it's one of those things like, yes, it was because he was pretending to be a Buddhist monk, but I think it's something that everybody needs to do better at, maybe, maybe just like across the board. All right. You hadn't watched this one, so I don't want to spend a ton of time. I just, I do want to lift this up and the end of the good place. So trying to do this without spoilers. Eventually, they come to a spot where they realize if everything's perfect long enough, it still isn't enough for us, if that makes sense. Like you get to a point where you're either going to have fulfillment or you're not, you know? And what's funny is they come up with this kind of idea where they choose to stop existing and they're kind of able to transcend. I'm trying not to give details. I know that's still a bit of a
Yeah,
spoiler, but it's interesting that idea of just transcendence because so I know a lot of Buddhism is more focused on like philosophy and that kind of teaching and a lot less concerned with gods or the afterlife or anything like that. But my understanding is there's still kind of this idea of an ultimate transcendence or enlightenment or a state where you're no longer just you, but you're able to kind of be transcended. Is that more or less kind of where it's at?
no, that's exactly how it is. Some people believe that, some people don't.
Okay, so it's not like a fundamental part of the belief, but it is something that exists.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. So where are you on that kind of stuff? Are you like seeking some kind of ultimate enlightenment, or are you just seeking to be as enlightened as you can be?
Be as enlightened as I can be. Just be a
Yeah.
better version of myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Now we jump to the best show. Avatar the Last Airbender. I know this is Avatar Generations, but people can deal with it. We're talking about Avatar the Last Airbender. Man, and I love this show. And I was trying to talk to you. I was like, I don't know if there's technically any Buddhism, but I know there's a lot of teachings from Buddhism. And then you pointed out the monks, the Airbender nomads, were in fact Buddhist. So you want to talk some about that?
Yeah, so they're really, if you look at just their airbenders, and like the way they meditate. If you look how they're, what would you say how he would become into his enlightened state?
Oh,
I
his
forget what that
avatar
was.
state?
Yeah, the avatar state. So that
Yeah.
is really like his enlightened state, because he's getting all of the teachings passed down to him from all of the other avatars, and to get there, he has to meditate. Even through one of the shows, I forgot his name, but they actually went through all of the chakras in the show, like how to
Yeah.
open them.
Yeah, that was actually something I was interested in talking about specifically too, because so I know like the airbenders are like go with the flow, non-violent, a lot of that kind of stuff, which is where I thought that this might be a little bit more accurate than Xiaolin Showdown, because they are kind of taught non-violence, and yet you do see some exceptions to that. Like you see but you see ultimately in the end, this is just a spoiler, Aang finds a way not to have to kill the Fire Lord. And that was like a big part of the
Mhm.
show. And it was because of some of his religious beliefs growing up as part of, the Airbender monks. So I always thought that was really interesting. But the chakras, what interests me about that is, and you might have to correct me, but I think it works like this. So where Christianity kind of broke off of Judaism, I think Buddhism kind of broke off of Hinduism, but like left a lot behind. So like you don't have like the gods and all that. But I think chakras originally started with yoga and like Hinduism, but I feel like Buddhism kind of adopted that part, the chakra part. Is that more or less accurate? Do you know?
Um, I'd have to do some more research on that, but it sounds very correct on how Hinduism
It
and
sounds smart,
Buddhism
right?
are very similar. They're very similar, just without like having as many gods.
Yeah. 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 That's what's interesting about Buddhism is And I can criticize my own camp. It's like one thing I really dislike when Christians do this. Oh, you worship Buddha and Buddha didn't die for your sins. I'm like, well, that's not Buddhism doesn't teach that Buddha was God. Like, what are you doing right now? Like,
Right. Yep.
yeah, of course it doesn't teach he died for their sins. It doesn't teach he's God. It just teaches more or less him as an example, if anything. And it's like, that's
Yep.
guys, no, chill. But Siddhartha, did you read the book, the Siddhartha novel that came out in 1993?
No, I have not.
It's really good. You should read. It's really good. But it kind of teaches of like the original Buddha and how he kind of came to be. And he was raised. There we go. Raised. He was raised Hindu. He was kind of a higher class, part of their class caste system in Hinduism in India, and more or less chose to broke away from all that and to live a simple life and try to seek out enlightenment. And what's interesting is if you see this, like the original Buddha that's from like Indian Buddha, you usually see him as like skin and bones. Like he's really skinny because he goes on this really long fast and all this stuff. It wasn't until China gets involved that all of a sudden you have the rounder Buddha that's kind of representing prosperity rather than saying, they're not trying to say the first Buddha was wrong. Here's the right Buddha. It's more just being round was a symbol.
Yeah, yeah, and it's more of like he symbolizes the happy Buddha.
Yeah, yeah. But I which is what's interesting is I always get excited when I see the skinny Buddha at like when you're like TJ Maxx or something. I always look for them. I'm like, yeah, a skinny Buddha, because I'm like, that's the one from the Siddhartha novel, and I like it because in that novel, I like how we started just talking about Avatar: Last Airbender, and I just jumped to a novel, but whatever, it's fine.
So,
In the novel, whenever he's on the fast, he gets like there's 3 different temptations that comes his way. So like one is lust, and then one is like power, and it's very similar to, for Christians, we have the story of Jesus fasting on the mountain, and he gets tempted with power, with food, and with something else, and he chooses to fast anyway. So the Siddhartha story has some similar things. It's not literally God, and it's not the devil doesn't come to him, but you have these different creatures that are tempting him with lust, with power, with whatever else. He chooses to just kind of be unattached to those things. And this kind of idea of non-attachment is one of the things that I picked up as like a really big facet of Buddhism. Is that more a universal belief, or yeah?
I believe that a lot of maybe other religions teach about non-attachment. In Buddhism, it's very like I would say being non-materialistic, to don't hold attachments to certain things of life.
Yeah. I remember in school when I was studying Buddhism, one of the big things that stood out as like whenever I had to like summarize some of the beliefs, I think it was kind of like all life is suffering because we're attached to all of these things. And as long as you're attached to these things, you will suffer. So, for example, I love these white Monster energy drinks. But if I drink them every day, then suddenly don't have them for a day, my body is attached to it. So I have these caffeine headaches. I have like withdrawals kind of stuff. That's like a physical example. But I think there's also things like other people. I can get attached to other people. Then when I lose them, I have suffering, right? And
Yep.
same thing with all my possessions. So I think this teaching of non-attachment isn't just to avoid suffering, but I think it's just showing us that to be enlightened means that there's more than what's around us. Is that kind of
Yep.
okay?
Yep. There has to be a balance between both.
Yeah. Now, do we see that at all in the Avatar: The Last Airbender? Sorry, I know I got so off track with that.
There's definitely, because if you look at how when Aang, he can't waterbend in the
Yeah.
water book, and he really wants to, and he has to let go of how he accidentally hurt forget her name. He hurt what's his
The
name,
girl.
sister. Yeah, he hurt
Yeah.
her, and he has to let that go because he didn't mean to, and he said that he was never going to firebend again when he was learning fire.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, yeah, that has to be hard to learn non-attachment because a lot of which I don't know how much this is cultural and how much of this is like within like Christian circles. It's almost like we're taught to feel guilty for the pain we've caused to others. And I think to an extent, you shouldn't just be completely okay hurting people and doing whatever you want,
Right, right.
obviously. But I think if you hold on to that forever, you really hold yourself back. Um, really
Yep.
funny example, actually, in Doctor Who. You see where the Doctor more or less had to choose to genocide two whole groups, or the whole universe was going to be destroyed. And you have like 15 years of the show where the Doctor is just constantly tormented, feeling awful about himself because he can't let that go. And it wasn't until recently, which we've done a couple episodes about this, the Doctor actually went and took time to heal. And that's allowed him to kind of be a healthier version of himself and kind of grow past
Hmm.
that. And I think, yeah, we all do stuff, right? Like we all hurt other people. Like it's not something that I think anyone can really avoid without just not interacting with anybody ever.
Right.
As long as you are a person in the real world interacting with other people in the real world, you're going to cause pain at some point.
Yep.
And
Yep.
learning how to A, make amends, I think that's important, but then B, forgive yourself is actually a really important part of just life, man. And that's where so much of Buddhism, I feel like, comes down to just doing life well.
Well, life is simple. We make it complicated.
Mm, yeah, 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 that's true. Um, okay, so you mentioned a couple others. Earlier you mentioned an anime you said that had some Buddhism in it. Do you wanna bring that back up?
Yes, and this is well, it's more of just like a shonen anime. It's called Record of Ragnarok, and in that one, Buddha is actually a character in the show,
Ooh, that's
and
fun.
really it has like all of the gods. So it's Record of Ragnarok. So it's a Ragnarok on Earth, and all of the gods are there. So Zeus is there. They have Adam. He's there. He's fighting for Earth, and
Adam,
Buddha.
like from the Bible, Adam.
Yes, yes.
Okay, all right, cool.
And, yep. So
Sure.
they have a lot of different gods in this show. So the Hindu god is
Interesting.
in there. Um, uh, Even Odin and Thor are in the anime as well.
That actually sounds really fascinating. So
It,
it's
it's
just
it's a
like,
really good anime. They just came out with the second season.
so how do they portray Buddha in that one? Is that like, is Buddha just like part of this giant battle royale, or is he like what is going on?
Uh, I'll try and say as much as I can without ruining it because he's my favorite character in the show. Just because of how they portray him,
Nice,
he's pretty much he does what he wants. Like he has,
nice.
it's like it's like he has a care in the world, but he just does what he wants. Like whatever, if they tell him to do something, he's just like, nah, I'll just do what I want. It doesn't make any sense what you guys want because they're trying to end the world by having the gods beat the humans
Oh,
and 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 as Buddha being human in the show, he's a human. When
okay.
and he turns later on he turns into a god by becoming enlightened. They let him pretty much become a
Oh,
god in the show.
that's
So
kind of
really
cool.
he's on both sides, being a human and being a god.
So kind of like the bridge between.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
So is Adam a god in this, or is Adam a human?
No, they do not have him as a god. Him and I think Eve shows up too in the
Fascinating.
beginning. I think in like because I think he
That's
was
a
the
lot of
first
fun
person to. I think they're all fighting each other. Yeah, yeah.
though.
But they have him as a human.
Hmm. Okay, yeah, I mean that makes sense. I was curious because I'm like, okay, obviously he's not a god in like Jewish or Christian or Islam belief, but Adam literally translate mankind. So I was like, it'd be kind of weird to have him not be a human. I lost Ant for a second, but I think he's back. He's making a face. Ant,
Oh,
can you hear me?
I think I lost connection for a second.
You did, but you're back. Okay, cool. So Adam is a human, so that's good.
Yeah, there we go.
All right. So the other thing I wanted to bring up, even though it's not a Buddhism thing, which I thought it was, I thought The Life of Pi, it's a novel that was later became a movie, I think in 2016, 2013, I don't know, something 20-teen year, The Life of Pi, this young child, he's raised in India in a zoo. And his mother kind of helps him learn about Vishnu and the Hindu gods. And then as he's growing up, he's spends a lot of time near this Catholic church. So he also becomes Catholic. And he thanks Vishnu for showing him Jesus. He goes like, thank you, Vishnu, for leading me to Jesus. Later on, he then ends up near a mosque and decides he's also Muslim. And there's this whole tension, and his dad's like, you can't be all these three things, right? And they keep kind of going back, like, this doesn't make sense for you to be all of this. For some reason, I thought it was Buddhism instead of Hinduism. So we'll probably talk about this more when we do some of the other religions later on. But I think there is a lot of Buddhist thought where they keep trying to get him to, you have to be exclusive. You have to have one of these things, and that's it. You have to have this like tight fist around your religion. And the older version of him is kind of doing some of the narrating, and he's talking to someone who's trying to like get the story down to write down the story. This is in the movie. I don't remember if it's in the novel or not, but the character uses I can't remember the exact quote, but one thing I thought was really interesting. He says, faith is a house and religions are really just the rooms in it. And there's a lot of room for doubt in each room. And I don't know. I really just liked that vision where he's like, yeah, I don't need to just hold on to one thing. Like I can have all of these things and kind of learn and be able to doubt. I think the scary thing about religion to a lot of people, and his dad, I think, was really afraid of religion. He also was like, he almost died and was cured from Western medicine. And he just has this idea that all religion's kind of silly. But I think a lot of people's hesitancy around religion in general is this idea of like, you're not allowed to doubt. And it's scary that a lot of people draw these like lines so hard of, if you're not this, you're out. And there's a lot of exclusivism. Is that something that you've experienced or seen as far as like whenever you're thinking of like Buddhism, or is that really more our Western religions that tend to be this like more exclusively mindset?
I think it's more Western, and because you can be open to a lot of things, and because in Buddhism it's all spirituality, so you have to have an open mind to a lot of things. So it's not just like one right. There's not just one right way of doing something. There's multiple, and I would say in some religions in the Western, they only have one right way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, yeah. And I think that's part of like, we kind of confuse people um, because there's this level of, we have the absolute truth because we have this book, right? That's like a lot of like Christian kind of ideology. And it seems like to people, everyone's saying we have absolute truth, and everyone's like, oh, just trust it on faith. And it's like, well, there's at least 8 major world religions. Who knows how many others? And how do you know you're right? Kind of deal.
Right.
And I think that's where I get in trouble, because I kind of like fall into some of this like social Darwinism ideas of, a lot of these things have been around for a long time, but because they work, like that's where like it makes sense to pull some of these ideas, because if nothing in Buddhism worked, it wouldn't still be around, like it's around because it actually is helping people and it's
Right.
working. Otherwise, it wouldn't still be around. um, and that's where like, I don't know. I hope we have not made you feel like, hey, come be a Christian, and that's why we want you on this show. And you've never made me feel that way. And I hope people listening understand that, like, we're not like, hey, be a Buddhist and a Christian, or be a Christian or be a Buddhist. Like, we're just kind of looking at this thing and trying to have fun with, like, where does it fit? What does it look like in these shows? And what can we learn from it? Whether or not you're Buddhist, Christian, or whatever, we can still learn something from these IPs and what's kind of being taught in these. Yeah. Um, did you have any other ones that you wanted to lift up, or just any like general statements on how you think Buddhism has been portrayed in fandoms?
Not that I can touch on that at the moment, no. But I would say, um, just having an open mind to anything helps out, and that's just
Yeah,
any other religion or any show that you want to get into, because you never know, you learn something. That's how I take Buddhism, is like you said, you learn something from each one. You can take a piece of it, you don't have to take, you can take whatever you want, and
yeah,
that, just like any show, you can learn something and take from it.
yeah. And I think I'm trying to figure out how to say what I want to say here. I think a lot of it is learning to be a good listener. Sometimes keeps you from just mistakes in general. You know, because I'm thinking of how many people like earlier they think of Buddhism as people who worship Buddha. That's not a thing. And if you just listen to people and kind of learn, you'd see that. Um, and if you want people to consider Christianity at all, yelling at them that this is the only way is not a good way to make people kind of open to it, but rather listening to people, understanding where they're coming from, and then having conversations. I think I think in general, it's just better to learn to listen, to be a little bit slower to talk. And yeah, that's coming from a podcaster, so I'm not doing great at it, obviously. But I just think it's a good thing for us all to practice, to learn from. Um, and I think one thing again, this is just like my only last observation, and you could tell me if like I'm just off base, but it seems like Buddhism is the hardest to find. Like, and I'm kind of curious why, because a lot of times I find like Taoism is all over the place of like that duality kind of stuff. You have a lot of Islam, like Aladdin. Um, yeah, there's just a lot of stuff that has like other religions. Like Catholic has whole animes, like The Blue Exorcist. But I can't think of a lot of things that have Buddhism, and I wonder if that's because it's more closer to a philosophy than some of our other religions are, or if it's just kind of a coincidence, and I can't think.
No, no, you're right. It's more of a philosophy. You really have to dig deep and
Yeah.
find.
Yeah. Yeah. And then at that point, it's kind of like, do you really consider it Buddhism when, your favorite cartoon tells you that you need to learn to have less attachments or, or, that, it's kind of like, I don't think that, but I mean, it is a Buddhist teaching, but does that make it Buddhism? I don't know, man. So it makes it a little bit harder with some of that. It's to really pinpoint where is
Right,
Buddhism in our fandom.
right. It does.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. But I definitely think that some of these, especially Avatar the Last Airbender, Um, and I'll say The Good Place. I think both of those are probably a really good place to start. It sounds like the Ragnarok show too, but I haven't seen it.
Oh
So do you,
yeah.
if you had to pick like one of the fandoms that you're like, go visit this. This is going to show you the most. Which one would you say is like going to show us the most of like Buddhist teaching?
Avatar.
All right, there we
Yep.
go. Everybody, go watch Avatar: The Last Airbender. And with that, then let's go ahead and let's wrap this show up with just a recommendation. Just it doesn't have to be related to any of this at all. But if you just have to recommend something for people to go check out, what are you having them go check out?
Warhammer. Warhammer 40K.
All right,
That actually
that
has a
is
lot of religious stuff in it as well, and it has a lot of fandom stuff in it, and they've been working
hmm,
on that for years.
all right. I'm going to recommend something that I already brought up, but I'm cheating here. But The Life of Pi, I really do think if you haven't seen the movie or read the book, it's worth it. I don't know if it's worth doing both. I feel like the movie gets everything you need, but if you're more of a reader, read. It's fine. But I definitely love that series. So then, with that, we'll go ahead and again ask everybody if you can leave us a rating and review. One of those. Like, subscribe, Patreon. This episode, no companion episodes happen. We promise next time it'll go live to Patreon before it goes on to YouTube. This was like a one time thing. It's fine, guys. But hey, make sure you check out the rest of our companion series on YouTube with that link down below. And of course, we need y'all to do one very important thing. And remember, we're all a chosen people, a geekdom of priests.